Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Hundreds of thousands rally on the day to support oppressed Iraqis. UN report finds Israeli settlers stealing Palestinian water springs. And Saudi protests in solidarity with Abha students spread to Riyadh. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, begins now.
Iraqi people have held a huge rally in the southern city of Basra on the 9th anniversary of the US-led invasion of their homeland. The protesters called on all Iraqis to unite against foreign enemies. They also demanded that the government provide better services for the people. The US-led war on Iraq left over 1 million people dead. 9 years on, many parts of Iraq are in ruins and deadly attacks happen almost every day. Washington withdrew its military forces from Iraq back in December, but despite the official end to the war, a number of American troops and mercenaries still remain there. There's also opposition inside Iraq to Washington operating a huge embassy with thousands of diplomats and staff in Baghdad. In Bahrain, thousands of people have expressed their anger at the ruling al-Khalifa regime as they mourned another protester killed by regime forces.
In Bahrain, thousands of people have expressed their anger at the ruling al-Khalifa regime as they mourned another protester killed by regime forces. People have mourned 27-year-old Sabri Mahfoud. He died when police fired tear gas at him and a group of protesters at a funeral rally. He is the latest victim to be killed at the hands of the government. This just 24 hours after the death of 41-year-old Jafar Jassim Radi. He was found dead in his home after inhaling tear gas fired at his residence by regime forces. Bahrain has been witnessing a revolution since mid-February last year. Scores have lost their lives, many of them under torture in prison. Thousands more have been arrested. The protesters want justice and the downfall of the al-Khalifa regime. The main political bloc, al-Wafaq, has slammed Saudi Arabia's interference in the country in an anniversary marking the first anniversary of the Saudi troops' deployment in Bahrain.
The continued presence, hence, of the Saudi troops has no meaning, and their continued presence continues to sabotage and harm Bahrain and makes reaching a political solution very difficult. And so we call on these troops to leave Bahrain.
The bloc also reiterated that Iran has no involvement whatsoever in the revolution in Bahrain.
And therefore, truth has been uncovered that there is no Iranian military intervention.
Bahrainis are angry with the West, especially the US and the UK, for their continued support for the British-founded ruling al-Khalifa family. They have burnt the US flag on numerous occasions to show their anger at Washington's support. The US has faced mounting criticism for turning a blind eye to what is happening in Bahrain, the home to its 5th Naval Fleet, while preaching the promotion of human rights and democracy.
A report issued by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in the occupied Palestinian territories confirmed that 56 water springs in the West Bank are now targeted by Israeli settlers. The international organization accused the occupation authorities of using threats and intimidation to prevent Palestinians from accessing these water springs, in addition to seizing their land.
So unless you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to...
تقرير المنظمة الدولية أظهر أن حرمان الفلسطينيين من الوصول إلى
A United Nations report showed that depriving Palestinians from reaching water springs could constitute one of the most notable examples of settlement activity. The report said that 56 water springs in the West Bank are located near Israeli settlements, and for this reason, Palestinians are prevented from reaching them. Even worse, 84% of the affected springs are on private Palestinian land, while Israelis use 86% of the groundwater resources of the mountain region.
Under international law and Israeli law, the Israeli authorities have to return the land to its owners and allow the Palestinians to freely access their springs. They also have to prosecute the settlers and force them to leave the private Palestinian lands they've seized.
وإلى قرى نابلس توجهنا.
We then headed to the villages of Nablus. We walked in the woods that Palestinians are deprived from entering. We arrived with the delegation of the UN office to Al-Khawanik Spring in Wadi Ali. Settlers changed its name to the Spring of Eli, the name of the settlement that encircles the water spring. Settlers have turned it into a tourist attraction. Hajj Abu Ala was encouraged by the presence of UN officials, so he came to inspect his land and the spring. And as soon as we arrived, a settlement guard came to confirm that Palestinians can reach their land, but the discourse was different.
I come here twice a week to pick the fruits, but I can't trim the leaves, plow the land, or do anything else. I can't reach the water. It's forbidden. How can I reach it?
The United Nations says the settlers who are protected by the occupation soldiers adopt a policy of intimidation and threats in an attempt to rush the increase of settlers in the occupied territories.
It is one more example of the settlers' attempt to expand their control of regions classified in Area C. It is possible to see that through the takeover of trees, woods and streets. They are trying to take control of all the territories outside the settlements.
Controlling a water spring, then the land that surrounds it, then the mountain, then the valley, completes the scene of full domination of the land and the expulsion of a people.
People are dead and 5 wounded after a gunman on a motorcycle opened fire at a Jewish school in southern France. The brazen attack occurred around 8 o'clock this morning and has drawn sweeping international condemnation. IBA's Ellie Wogelanter has more.
An unknown person riding a motorcycle opened fire at the Otsar Torah synagogue and school in Toulouse in southern France this morning, killing at least 4 people and wounding 5 others, 1 seriously. The dead were identified as 30-year-old Rabbi Yonatan Sandler, a dual French-Israeli citizen who had lived in the Kiryat Yovel neighborhood in Jerusalem, his 6-year-old son Aryeh, and his 3-year-old son Gavriel. Sandler had gone to Toulouse as an emissary in the fall to strengthen the community. The 4th victim was 8-year-old Miriam Monsanego, the daughter of the school's principal. Witnesses said the killer rode into the area near the school's gate, got off a scooter outside the school, and opened fire with an automatic rifle at point-blank range at a group of students disembarking from a school bus. A French prosecutor said he shot at everything he had in front of him, children and adults, chasing the children inside the school before fleeing the scene on a black scooter. Police shut the city down looking for the gunman as families hugged and wept in front of police cars around the school in the aftermath of the shooting. The Interior Ministry ordered police across the country to contact Jewish organizations to arrange increased vigilance. France has the 4th largest Jewish community in the world and largest in Europe, with an estimated 700,000 people. Toulouse is home to a community of 25,000 Jews. The shooting was the single worst act of violence against Jews in France since 1982, when 6 people were killed and 22 wounded in a grenade attack by Palestinians on a Jewish restaurant in Paris. French President Nicolas Sarkozy flew to the school, where he declared that everything must be done so the killer is arrested. He called for a minute of silence in schools across the country in response to the national tragedy. Today's attack was the 3rd in a series of attacks against ethnic minorities in the past 10 days, using the same method of a gunman wearing a motorcycle helmet and fleeing on a scooter after the shootings. The other attacks against soldiers of North African origin took place on March 11th and 15th. Police are investigating whether the 3 incidents are connected. Ellie Wogelanter, IBA News.
In other news, despite the shaky ceasefire in the south, a rocket fired from Gaza landed this morning on a farm in the Eshkol Regional Council. No injuries were reported, but the projectile caused damage to a local greenhouse. Israel was today the focus of a session held by the United Nations Human Rights Council. The body met to discuss a series of resolutions on Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. The council also invited a senior Hamas member to testify, a move that Israeli diplomats are working to prevent. More in this report from IBA's Aaron Viner.
Israel was the target of 5 resolutions under consideration at today's 19th session of the UN Human Rights Council, including one from Pakistan demanding the return of the Golan Heights to Syria. The other 4 resolutions were submitted by Palestine, even though the entity is not a UN member state. One calls for the affirmation of the Palestinian right to self-determination, and the next addresses the recent round of violence between Israel and Gaza. While expressing concern over the firing of rockets at Israel, the resolution calls on UN members to provide emergency economic assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and condemns use of violence by Israel. The third Palestinian proposed bill demands implementation of the Goldstone Report on the 2009 Gaza war, and the last calls on Council President Laura Dupuy-Lasserre of Uruguay to appoint a fact-finding commission to the West Bank. The resolution calls on Israel to cooperate with the UN team that intends to examine how the existence of Israeli settlements and Jewish construction in East Jerusalem impact Palestinians' civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. While the UNHRC is charged with monitoring the state of human rights worldwide, it has frequently been accused by the U.S. and Israel of pursuing a decidedly anti-Israel platform and focusing disproportionately on the Jewish state, while completely ignoring gross human rights violations in the nations of many of its council members, including China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia.
تظاهر محتجون في العاصمة السعودية الرياض.
Protesters rallied in the Saudi capital Riyadh to condemn the repression female students were subjected to at King Khalid University in Abha by the school's security members with the support of regime forces. The demonstrators demanded the Saudi authorities open a full investigation into the repression and punish the killers. Meanwhile, the Committee to Protect Journalists in the Middle East and North Africa called on the Saudi authorities to immediately release 3 administrators of websites that reported on the political movement in the country's eastern province.
Protests in Saudi Arabia are escalating within the framework of student demonstrations that were launched nearly 2 weeks ago to denounce violence that left 1 female student dead and dozens injured at Abha University. In the capital Riyadh, hundreds of protesters held a demonstration to condemn the crackdown on female students at King Khalid University in Abha by the university's security members with the support of regime forces. Participants in the demonstration chanted slogans denouncing the crime committed by the regime's security members and demanded Saudi authorities open a full investigation to look into the cause of the crackdown and punish the killers. The protesters also expressed their complete solidarity with the university students' legitimate demand for freedom of speech. In light of the escalating pace of protests and sit-ins witnessed in various parts of the region, Saudi King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz issued a decree ordering the formation of a crisis committee to monitor the developments of the case. He demanded that relevant institutions act immediately to halt the protests at any price, to offer students enticements to stop demonstrating, and to work on preventing protests from spreading the way they have in the eastern province. And in light of the arrest campaign carried out by Saudi authorities against protesters, the Committee to Protect Journalists in the Middle East called on the Saudi regime to immediately release 3 administrators of websites that cover the protests in the country's eastern province, which face severe restrictions. The committee accused Saudi authorities of banning journalists from entering the eastern province to cover protests demanding political reforms. The committee pointed to the arrest of photographer Habib Ali Matik, who oversees the news section of Al-Fajr al-Thaqafiyya website, or the Cultural Dawn. It also points to the arrests of photographer Hussein Malik al-Salam and Al-Qatif resident Sheikh Jalal Mohammed al-Jamal, who was transferred to an unknown site.
فقد نددت بأساليب القمع والاعتقالات في السعودية مؤكدة أن هذه الأساليب.
As for the Arab Network for Human Rights Information, it condemned the methods of repression and the arrests in Saudi Arabia, confirming they are now systematic and are being used against anyone the Saudi authorities believe disagrees with the government's tyranny.
الذي بات معتادا على غض الطرف عن الانتهاكات الفظة للحكومة السعودية.
The kingdom is encouraged by the blatant complicity of the international community that seems accustomed to turning a blind eye to the Saudi government's abundant violations against those who criticize it. And amid the theft of the citizens' lands and properties by Saudi princes, these images posted online show clashes between the Amara tribe and security forces in al-Qatar after a Saudi prince attempted to seize their land and expel them from it. They had no choice but to defend themselves. Political observers believe the Saudi authorities' use of systematic repression will not prevent the ignited protests from spreading to more cities after having taken place in various Saudi communities in a wide-ranging number of areas.
Syrian opposition sources said 13 people were killed across Syria today. Activists said Syrian army forces shelled a number of neighborhoods in the old city of Homs, especially in al-Khalidiyah, which led to the injury of civilians. The Qasir area of Homs was subjected to gunfire by heavy machine guns and mortar shells. 5 citizens were injured as a result. In Aleppo, a group of gunmen attacked a military vehicle and killed a lieutenant colonel and wounded others.
The exact details of the clashes between Syrian regime forces and Free Syrian Army members in al-Mosaic area remain unknown. Activists believe these clashes were the most violent in a Damascus neighborhood since protests began in Syria. Meanwhile, Syrian state media said the clashes were with a group that took over a home and used it as a hideout in the neighborhood.
Gunmen were staying here, conducting corrupt and terrorist operations. They opened fire, then they went down the Malwar Street, went from home to home, burning, vandalizing and smashing things inside homes. Then they started firing at security forces and the army.
Al-Mosaic neighborhood is close to the security centers in the Syrian capital. A large number of army officers loyal to the regime and government security institutions live there. The presidential palace overlooks the large neighborhood, and an infamous prison is located in this area and has detained a large number of anti-regime dissidents for a long time. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, at least 18 soldiers from the regime's forces were injured. State media said 3 of those it referred to as terrorists were killed and a 4th was wounded, while 1 regime soldier was killed and 3 were injured.
The security conducted a surgical operation to protect the residents, children, elders, and women. About an hour later, around 9 o'clock, and a little after that, security took control of the area and arrested part of the group, and the members died.
كما قال الناشطون أن قوات الجيش السوري قصفت عدة أحياء من مدينة حمص القديمة.
Activists said Syrian army forces shelled a number of neighborhoods in the old city of Homs, especially al-Khalidiyah, where multiple mortar shells fell on houses, injuring civilians. Websites run by activists reported that security forces stormed other neighborhoods in a wide-ranging arrest campaign in the city. The Qasir area of Homs endured gunfire by heavy machine guns and mortar shells, and at least 5 citizens were wounded. In Jabal al-Zawiya of Idlib, military forces stormed the village of Abdeta and opened heavy fire. In the village of Maryan, security forces burned more than 60 houses within 24 hours. In addition, clashes broke out in Dir az-Zur between the regime army and Free Syrian Army members. In Aleppo, a group of gunmen attacked a military vehicle, killing a lieutenant colonel and wounding others.
وفي المقابل استمرت التظاهرات الاحتجاجية اليومية في عدة مناطق سوريا.
Daily protests continued in a number of Syrian areas, despite the regime's use of an iron fist against these demonstrations. At the same time, a number of international experts arrived to Syria. They are delegated by the UN Arab League Joint Special Envoy, Kofi Annan, to hold talks with the Syrian leadership on means to put an end to the violence. Hayan Akub, BBC.
On the political front, the UN envoy's technical team arrived to Damascus to hold talks on the UN envoy's propositions and the Syrian response. Our correspondent in Damascus reported that a joint assessment mission from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the United Nations began on Friday to evaluate the civilians' need for humanitarian aid in Syrian cities subjected to violence, including Homs, Hama, Aleppo, Daraa, and the countryside of Damascus.
The return of al-Qaeda to the scene in Yemen has prompted members of parliament to seek a questioning of the new government. While some Yemeni legislators have accused members of the former regime of seeking to refuel al-Qaeda in a bid to halt the revolution's progress, others rejected the authorization given to U.S. forces to deploy near Yemeni territories. No tangible progress has been made by the military committee designated by the Gulf Initiative to restructure the army and security forces. Abdurrahman al-Shumari reports from Sana'a.
The military committee resumed its duties by removing the remaining military checkpoints and posts across various parts of the Yemeni capital. However, this measure has failed to restore order to other cities, where the security deterioration is intensifying and spiraling out of control. The Yemeni opposition accused members of the former regime of using al-Qaeda to stir chaos in the country.
I agree. The security situation is continuing to deteriorate, and there's a security breach in the country. Several disturbing phenomena have emerged. Terrorism has spread for the first time to new areas. These acts of terror are being blamed on al-Qaeda. However, I don't believe that al-Qaeda is behind this. I think certain groups are using al-Qaeda in order to stir chaos and benefit from it.
The unprecedented security breach witnessed in the country's southern regions has prompted members of parliament to question the national consensus government, while Saleh's supporters are calling for the launch of a national dialogue before restructuring the army and security forces. The Yemeni opposition believes it should be the other way around.
Certain groups are pushing for the restructuring of the army at the expense of holding a dialogue and drafting the law of transitional justice. The international community, the UN, Ben Omar, and the countries that oversaw and signed the Gulf Initiative, all these groups must send a strong message to the Yemeni sides and urge them to implement the agreement. Otherwise, they must take a decisive position and sanction the parties that continue to procrastinate.
Rights groups and parliamentarians have criticized the ongoing violations of Yemeni national sovereignty. They also demanded to revoke Saleh's sponsored mandate, authorizing the U.S. Army to launch military raids on southern Yemen at any time and by any means. Nearly a month has passed since the inauguration of Abu Mansur Hadi as the president of Yemen, in a move that was described then as the first step in a 1,000-mile journey to resolve the Yemeni crisis. However, the fragile security situation continues to diminish opportunities to rescue Yemen. Abdurrahman al-Shamiri, Dubai TV, Sana'a.
مريم الصفار البالغة من العمر
28-year-old Miriam al-Safar became the first woman to work as a metro driver in the United Arab Emirates and the Middle East. After years of working in the banking sector, she decided to obtain a license to drive Dubai's metro.
She is not just a passenger riding the train from one place to another, she is conducting the train. On the two train rails, she professionally conducts the train and skillfully plans the routes and movements of the train. Mariam al-Safar is the first woman in the United Arab Emirates and the Middle East to work as a train conductor.
The metro system in Dubai is new, so I decided to enter this sector since I'm interested in this site and field. I will enter this sector and quickly move up. This is the idea that sparked my interest to work here and operate the train.
Dubai's metro is considered one of the most advanced metro systems in the world. It is fully automated. However, it sometimes requires manual activation, especially in case of emergencies and during maintenance.
I drive the train manually if there's a problem with the train. We faced problems before. For example, if the train is stuck at the station and we must evacuate the passengers, that's when we manually drive the train. But the train is normally completely automated through the control center.
This is affirmative, Alex.
Besides the automatic and manual control of the train, Mariam's responsibilities include patrolling the automatic train to determine if all its technical parts are functioning.
نحن طبعا قبل ما ندخل قطارات السكة نقوم بتشيك على القطارات من ناحية الأجهزة الإلكترونية. Of course, before I start the train on the trajectory, I inspect the electronic parts of the metro and make sure that the brakes, batteries, and the doors are all fully functioning and ensure the cleanliness of the train. We check all of those things before the train is operational.
Attention all passengers.
ومن الجدير بالذكر أن الحكومة الإماراتية
It is worth mentioning the UAE's government is exerting major efforts to encourage its local citizens to be involved in the country's various fields. Mariam, the 28-year-old young woman, is considered a beneficiary of these policies that attempt to change the world's view on the Emirati women's abilities.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.